This process of procuring submarines is a major decision for the Canadian Navy, for the Canadian Forces, and for the Canadian government.
Part of its commitment to increase military spending, Canada is in the process of shopping for a new fleet of submarines right now.
And I think more importantly, we signed the first ever Canada-Korea Security and Defense Partnership Agreement. This is a profound investment on both sides to be able to build on the relationship that we've had with the Korean.
The question seemed innocent at first. Sir, what's your view on what Canada needs to do to get things back on track? The cameras waited, the lights hummed, and the man in front of them smiled thinly before speaking words that would ripple far beyond that room. Well, he said, Canada lied. What they did was terrible. We needed tariffs for national security, and they turned it around. They're getting hurt by tariffs, and we're gaining by tariffs. His tone carried a mix of frustration and warning. But behind that statement lay a much larger story, a story of nations rethinking who they are in a world that is quietly rewriting its balance of power. For decades, Canada and the United States moved in rhythm, their economies intertwined, their defense policies mirrored, their industries interlocked. When one spoke, the other often echoed. Yet lately, that harmony had fractured. Tariffs, once an abstract policy term, had become the symbol of a deeper rift, a sign that the era of easy partnership was fading. The United States, under pressure to protect domestic industries, began imposing heavy duties on imports, including Canadian metals, automotive components, and industrial goods. Ottawa responded with retaliatory measures of its own, promising to strike back where it would hurt the most in the U.S. while minimizing damage at home. It was the kind of quiet economic conflict that never makes the front page for long but leaves deep marks on history. And while the world's attention was fixed on the APEC summit in Seoul, a gathering of speeches, handshakes, and political choreography, something far more consequential was taking shape a few hundred kilometers away, at a sprawling shipyard on Gyeonggi Island. Hidden among the sounds of clanging steel and sea winds, Canada and South Korea were preparing to alter their destinies together. There, beneath gray skies and towering cranes, the groundwork was being laid for a defense cooperation agreement worth nearly $20 billion, an ambitious partnership to design and build a new generation of advanced submarines. When you're set to spend that kind of money, you want to see what you're buying. And that's exactly what Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney was doing as he toured Hanwha Ocean, one of Asia's most advanced submarine shipyards. Cameras captured the moment. Carney walking alongside South Korean Prime Minister Kim Min-seo and Defense Minister David McGuinty, all three men framed by a landscape of metal, water, and machinery. Officially, it was described as a diplomatic visit. Unofficially, it looked more like the opening scene of a strategic revolution. Inside Hanwha's production complex, Carney observed the Jangyong-seo, a 3x600-ton submarine built for stealth, efficiency, and endurance. South Korean engineers presented it as proof of their country's transformation, from a weapons buyer to a weapons builder, capable of rivaling Europe's defense giants. For Seoul, this was a chance to showcase its new industrial power. For Ottawa, it was a glimpse of a possible future, one where Canada's defense strategy would no longer rely so heavily on Washington's approval. Few North American leaders had ever set foot inside such a tightly guarded military facility. That made Carney's visit more than symbolic. It was an act of intent. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Canada was exploring a path of strategic self-reliance. While the specifics of the deal remained secret, the images from Gyeonggi Island spoke loudly. Three leaders standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a shipyard's shadow told the world that a shift was underway, and Washington could feel it. Behind the warm smiles and ceremonial photos, Ottawa's true motives began to surface. The project, called the Canadian Patrol Submarine Program, or CPSP, was not merely about replacing old vessels. It was about rebuilding an industry, redefining an identity, and reasserting sovereignty. Canada's current fleet of Victoria-class submarines was aging, unreliable, and increasingly obsolete. The new program, estimated to cost over $20 billion initially, and perhaps triple that once training, maintenance, and upgrades were included, was nothing less than a bid to reclaim technological independence. Only two contenders remained in the race to build the submarines: South Korea's Hanwha Ocean and Germany's ThyssenKrupp marine systems. Both passed rigorous evaluations, not just technical, but political. Because in a project of this magnitude, choosing a partner isn't only about engineering, It's about who you trust to stand beside you for decades. If South Korea wins, the first submarines could enter service by 2035, with the full fleet operational before 2043. Thousands of jobs would be created across Canada, from Halifax to Vancouver, reshaping the nation's defense industrial foundation. But this was never just about submarines. It was about something far deeper: national self-respect. For years, Canada's economy and defense strategy had revolved around the United States. The trade numbers told the story clearly. 3/4 of Canadian exports still flowed south of the border. That dependence worked, until Washington decided it didn't. In 2025, the U.S. introduced a sweeping protection package, slapping a 25% tariff on nearly every major Canadian export. Within months, Canada's shipments to its biggest market fell by 15%. Steel output dropped 11%, aluminum by 25%, and the automotive sector by nearly a quarter. More than 170,000 Canadian jobs hung in the balance. That pivot pointed squarely toward Asia. During the APEC summit, Carney and Kim Min-seo signed the Canada-South Korea Joint Declaration on Industrial Security and Defense Cooperation, an agreement that, on paper, focused on submarines, but in reality laid the foundation for a new kind of alliance. Analysts called it the birth of a Pacific partnership, one that could eventually extend beyond military hardware into energy, AI, and cyber defense. Under the agreement, South Korea's shipbuilding prowess would meet Canada's expertise in advanced software, simulation, and artificial intelligence. Hanwha Ocean signed a series of deals with Canadian firms: BlackBerry for cybersecurity systems, L3 Harris for systems integration, CAE for simulation training, and Gastops for propulsion control. Roughly 40% of the total project's value would be produced on Canadian soil, creating over 10,000 high-skilled jobs and pumping billions into local industries. For Ottawa, it was a way to turn defense spending into domestic innovation. For Seoul, it was a chance to cement itself as a technological powerhouse in North America. Economists predict the ripple effects will extend far beyond the shipyards. The CPSP could inject billions into research labs, universities, and regional industries. Nova Scotia, British Columbia, and Newfoundland are already preparing for a surge in naval engineering demand, while Ontario and Quebec compete to secure manufacturing contracts. Some call it the rebirth of Canadian heavy industry, an echo of the post-war era when innovation and national ambition went hand in hand. This transformation has drawn comparisons to the Darlington effect of the 1970s, when Canada's nuclear program sparked a new generation of engineers and technologies that later shaped global industries. Now, the submarine project could do the same, bridging defense, AI, and advanced manufacturing into a single national vision. To some in Washington, this looks like defiance. To others, it's realism. Canada isn't turning its back on the United States, but it's no longer content to orbit around it. The real story here isn't about submarines or tariffs. It's about sovereignty. The right to choose partners, to build industries, and to define security on one's own terms. Whether history remembers this as courage or folly depends on what happens next. Because every act of independence comes with a cost. Every gamble carries risk. But in a world of shifting alliances and protectionist walls, standing still may be the riskiest move of all. As Mark Carney watched the submarine's hull rise beneath Geoje Island's cranes, he knew this was more than a deal. Canada was charting its own course, bold, uncertain, and finally independent. The world was shifting, and Canada's next chapter wouldn't be written in Washington's shadow, but on the open seas where strategy, steel, and silence define power.